Hello, nerds.
The paints we used for this white workup are dark navy blue, slate gray, cool gray, excuse me, white blue, transparent white, and some glaze and wash medium.
When doing white, I think the most crucial decision is what color you base with. The easy kind of low-hanging fruit is dark grays. You know, we think in terms of black to white, going through a realm of grays, dark to light gray, and then white as a final. You have to kind of plan out what you want the model to look like at the end. So I want to do white with blues. It tends to give you a very crisp white, but I think then by weathering it and knocking that back down will bring some really cool interest onto the model. So that is what we do. And now we got to think about blues. We could, I think, man, let's just do this dark navy blue. Let's use some amp colors. How about that? And base coats, I tend to not really think in terms of what's going to be what color at the end. Like I know his head's probably going to be something more like a yellow or an orange. Towel colors tend to do that. But I'm going to go ahead and build it up from the blue too. This helps to make sure I'm not limiting myself. Now I am doing this in a way that's allowing some of the black shadow to still remain because there's a lot of lining on this guy, right? And I don't want to have to go back and panel line later. So do the blue very light. I won't call it zenithal, but I'm using more of a top-down spray. I'm not trying to spray from up underneath. The big kicker with white is you're going to want to have quite a bit of contrast on this model, and in order to make sure that we don't have to spray white on it. You know, I always go back to talking about like stormtroopers. Say, hey, what's the best way to paint white? Don't use white. And it's very truthful. But in order to not have to use white, you have to have a lot of darkness and contrast on the model. Notice I'm not thinning for my base coat. Straighten them out of the bottle into the cup. It's just like a brighter Payne's gray. Think of it like that. And what's really happening here is by leaving the black, I'm getting that kind of start with Payne's gray, then move a little bit brighter, all in one step. So that's why I'm not covering the black entirely, just kind of feathering over the top so that it gives me that feel of a darker version of the navy. And the underneath bits. Okay, that's good. Bang. It's going to be obviously the dark navy that we just did, and then we're going to go to slate gray and then a cool gray. So again, straight from Le Bateau. This is still just a base coat, but I am top down. So consider it like, noon o'clock. Yeah, that's great. That's a good combo. Dare I say wombo combo? The reason I'm not picking a lighting direction yet is because I want these two colors and the way they interact to basically be my shadow. This is going to be the way the model is set up so that the blue only really shows through very, very limitedly. And most of our shadows will be the combo of these two. Still fairly dark. The fact that even though we didn't thin this color, I'm just misting it. I'm about, 4 inches away from the model. I'm not overloading the model with this color. So you still get a lot of that blue showing through. So I'm going to spray from what we would call the 2 o'clock position to get our lighting down. And I just want to get in and kind of cheat some color into areas that might not normally have as much, but just so we can get some coloring going on. Always thinking about, okay, if my light is hitting from up above the left shoulder, then always think about where that light would get blocked, where it would hit the model directly, where it wouldn't hit at all. Also realizing this is still not our brightest color. So I want to make sure, since this isn't our brightest color, that I push it a little further. I don't want to leave myself with no place to put our white. So we have to determine now, okay, what do we want to do over here? Because this is only going to get brighter as we put white over it, transparent white, whatever we decide to do here. So in order to avoid this getting so bright, if we don't do anything in the shadows right now, then as we brighten this becomes darker visually, and it looks like we haven't painted anything. So from the 10 o'clock, right, so you've got over here, 2 o'clock, that's where we're applying our highlight from. Now we want to switch to 10 o'clock and pull back further, right? And just do a light dusting of the model from this side. So it doesn't get as bright on any of the areas, but this color does fall in there, and make sure that it kind of gives me just almost like we did a light dry brush. And a lot of that is done just by, like I said, pulling the brush back 6-8 inches instead of the normal 3 or 4 that we paint from with the airbrush. We got to get what is white on our model and look at how bright white blue is, right? So here we need a cup. We are going to thin. Whenever I'm getting to the filtered colors, right? So when you get to your brightest colors, you got to be careful. Do you have to thin them? No. I could spray this directly on the model. But when you get to your brightest colors, you're now starting to create a tremendous amount of contrast. So thinning is usually wiser. A lot of times you're going to get kind of more blotchy contrast. You'll see your highlights start to be pulled into spots. And so thinning the paint allows you to do that spot highlight that naturally blends, as opposed to not thinning the paint when it gets brighter. So white, blue, un, deux, trois, four. My whole shtick is I can only count to 3. What did we say yesterday when we were doing like stuff? We were doing like 6 to 1. So there, 6 to 1. Just a little spritz of water. To get the viscosity down, we want both lowering of opacity and viscosity when shooting it through the airbrush. We say when painting white, don't use white. How do you get away with not using white? You get a color that gets you so close, right? Like white blue, ivory, because they get you to the feel of brightness on the model without ever using white, which allows white to retain the king space of the brightest color for those really bright highlights, the final touch you want to put on the model. You can't go brighter. And so now you can't do highlights. And now you lose depth and you lose contrast and volume and all of those things. So leave white as the last thing you use. All right, so here we go. 10 o'clock off the shoulder again. Now I'm going to have to think about individual parts of the model separately. So the top of the shoulder here. Now, I will look at it and say that I probably want a little bit more brightness on this thigh and a little bit more brightness on the top of this one. So I'm going to cheat a little bit and get in here a little closer. Right, and just work up a hair more brightness on that thigh so it gives me more drama. A little bit like that. Gives me just a little bit more punch. Looking down here on the foot, this foot would be shadowed at the top because of the way our light would cover the top of the foot. If we look at where I'm the sun looking at the model, see how I can't see the top of that foot? So the highlight would be down towards the toe. A little bit of edge highlight right there on the other toe, just to brighten it a little bit. Okay. But over here with this foot, when we look at it where the sun, then I see the top of this foot. So I'm brightening up the top of this one. Now I'm working anywhere from 1 inch to 2 to 3 inches away. We already started getting the tops of all of this stuff. I'll get enough again over here just to feather a little color into the shadow side. Not too much. And now you're looking at, I've got good shadows on the thigh where the arms would be casting shadows, just because the paint wouldn't go there because I'm aiming like this. So the model blocks the paint from hitting the other parts, and I get those natural shadows on the thigh, waist area, all that kind of stuff. And remember, we still got to go brighter color. So when we go with the transparent white, that'll brighten up the uppermost parts too. Okay. A little bit more of this shoulder plate over here just to brighten it up. This may not be 100% correct, but I don't like this shoulder plate being so dark over on that side. And then again, evaluate. How dark is this versus this, knowing you're going to make this side a little bit brighter still. So again here, we're going to go from 10 o'clock and just do a light dusting. Hold the brush back 6 to 8 inches, something like that, and just kind of pull little pulses of the brush. And it'll have kind of a dry brush effect, and that it will just blend the two sides together faintly without giving me really bright white feel anywhere. It's one of the simplest and one of the absolute hardest to get, you know, because the light coming from this side would go all the way across. Maybe give myself a little bit more color down these pieces, right? But other than that, I've got brightness everywhere I think I should have brightness. That looks pretty uniform, right? Then as I rotate it around away from the light, I start picking up only the details. Maybe that thigh plate is still a little dark, so brighten that up a bit. And everything else is looking really good. Then we get over here and we know we're on our shadow side. And that's pretty good, right? Transparent white. I'm not going to thin this. I got a cup out, but I don't want a cup out. Transparent white is very, very translucent right out of the bottle. Out of all the transparents, it's the one you don't have to thin, right? In general. Now, you may want to thin it because it's thicker than you want for whatever you're doing. Sometimes I'll thin it a little bit in the airbrush because it is a little bit higher viscosity because of the zinc content in it. But most of the time, I don't worry about it. We just put it in the airbrush. Zoinks. And now we go back and we do the same thing we just did, focusing on those same areas, just tightening up a bit, a little bit, just aiming up at the top edge of the shoulder plate here. And see how it just gets me a little bit brighter across the top edge of that, and then that white blue flows down into our other grays. Transparent white is so good. As a filter like this, it's just great because it helps blend anything back. You know, if I did have some rough blends or areas where maybe I crossed my bright color into my dark color a little too much, this will help filter that out. And I extend it down a little into the shadows over here just because it helps blend all that out. This is where I just want to always kind of evaluate my areas and make sure that I'm getting the right amount of brightness everywhere, because this transparent white will be a lot more intense as I place it on the model, and then as it cures, it will lose a lot of its brightness. Not a lot, but it will lose enough of its brightness that you may want to go back and look. Don't say, oh yeah, that looks great, and then put it away and then be like, oh wait. But now we have that white armor with all that really cool blue, that dark navy is still there, right? That slate gray is still there, giving us a really cool transition into our white that feels nice, clean, and crisp. So the shadow of the dark navy blue gives us a really nice, cool shadow color in that recess area. Then we move on to slate gray. Slate gray is a bluish gray, so it's a fantastic color for this, and that it as you can see, right, it has just enough of blue. When I put it next to a blue, you can see, right? And so using that with the dark navy, I think was a great choice. And then moving into cool gray for the next highlight. The cool gray as a highlight for that, those three colors, right? The dark navy into slate gray into cool gray, fantastic workup. I would do an army just with this as the gray color, say Space Wolves, 30K Space Wolves. This would be incredible. And then we went in with white blue over the top of that. Just that was the first and only color that we thinned. We thinned down the white blue in a cup just with water and glaze wash medium so that it had lower opacity, and we filtered that over everything to bring the other colors together, and then the transparent white over the top of that. The goal is to leave it at something that when you look at it next to other models that you have, that armor's white, right? And against and on the table and with your armies and all of that, you know, other things that we've painted brighter, that's still white. When you put white next to it, it is not white. What that means is that white now becomes a very powerful tool, because when we go edge highlight stuff, white will appear to be the contrast we need for the solid edge and all of that. Whereas right now, we don't have a lot of space to move. And had I sprayed white on top of this, then you can't highlight it because you're hitting the top edges with your brightest color. And so in order to do that, you want to be careful not to move too close to white for your final color, because you need something to highlight those edges with, especially if doing stormtroopers, you know, white armor of any kind, white scars, towel, whatever you're doing in white. Stop before white, bright neutral gray, white blue, a bright ivory, something like that, that feels like a white because it's so punchy and you can provide so much contrast along with it. But at the end of the day, you can still edge highlight it with white. That's how to paint white with Jason. You can figure the rest out. Now just finish the owl.